exactly. I mean, there's question marks. These things constantly keep revising down. There was an article I just recently wrote in which we said that IMF is the eternal optimist, and there are too many years where we have seen IMF's projections being revised down. It almost seems to be a habit now, bad habit, where they start off with a high growth projection and then have to revise it down. And this year is not going to be any different. We are probably going to get significantly less than 3%. I am a bit surprised why IMF is doing that, because IMF, when it came into the EFF program, the Extended Fund Facility, it would have done a debt sustainability analysis. It would have then taken into account what the government, at that time, the projections of how government is going to repay its debts and service its loans over a period of the facility. So I'm a bit shocked and surprised about these news. I don't think it's confirmed yet, and I'd be surprised because the debt sustainability analysis takes that into account, and that includes both rollovers. It also includes raising of some finances externally in the commercial market, as well as the facilities that other countries, friendly countries, have been financial assurances that friendly countries have been doing.
Watch Federal Post. Bold and independent.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Hassan Zafar with Talking Politics. We have Javed Hassan Sahab with us. He is an investment banker, a columnist. He talks about politics and economy. So let's welcome him. Javed Sahab, bahut shukriya for joining today.
Thank you, Hassan Zafar Sahab, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Indeed. So now the point of discussion is Pakistan economy. To begin with, I would like to request you to give an overview of how the economy looks at present.
Well, let's put it this way. IMF team is here. It's reviewing the EFF arrangement, the structural adjustment arrangement. There are apparently issues in terms of revenue collection, especially in terms of diversification of tax collection. There are areas where there seem to have been not enough tax collection, especially in terms of retail, in terms of agriculture. And Pakistan, while keeps promising these structural adjustments, has failed to diversify its tax base. It has apparently met the requirement in terms of primary fiscal surplus. So those broad numbers may be right, but underlying structural changes are not taking place. On a more even grander macro level, there's question marks about IMF's projected targets of growth, which was initially when the program started. If you remember, it was around 3.5%. Then it was brought down to 3%, then 2.9%. Now there's talk that it will be probably even below 2%. Now we are now seeming to be stuck in a very low growth environment, and that doesn't seem to change. Now, if there's not enough growth, you also then have an effect on industrial production, in terms of profits of companies, in terms of people's incomes, as well as tax collection. So if you're not going to grow the economy, how are you going to expand the tax collection base other than imposing more and more punitive taxes, which has its own impact in terms of slowing down growth? So while they may talk about there being stability, and the only sign of stability that has been, and there are two of those, which is essentially that inflation has come under control and the currency has not depreciated. I don't think that's a measure of great success. Inflation in a number of countries where there is no growth has come under control, but that if it doesn't follow with growth, that means that it's basically a period of deflationary effect or a recessionary impact. It's not positive.
Yes, and now we have Moody's report. Moody's has upgraded Pakistan's banking sector as positive. It has upgraded its status. So banking sector appears to be doing very well. But on the other hand, as you gave us a list of problems which Pakistani economy is facing at the moment, though that situation is quite dismal. So how is this that the banking sector is performing well, but the economy overall is not performing well?
Banking sector is doing well simply on the basis that they only lend to the state. The state is a big borrower, so it's very safe. At as much as 60 to 65% of the banking assets are with the state in terms of PIBs and treasury bills. So yeah, the banking sector is relatively doing well for the moment, uh, but it's at the cost of every other sector in 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 the market. So I don't think the economy as a whole is doing well. It's really only the banking sector, and that is not really a reflection of the overall wealth of the nation.
Yeah, and this same Moody report is saying uh, that the growth rate projection for this year, 2025, is about 3%. Do you think that is a realistic figure, 3%? Because some people say it is even below 2%.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's question marks. These things constantly keep revising down. There was an article I just recently wrote in which we said that IMF is the eternal optimist, and there are too many years where we have seen IMF's projections being revised down. It almost seems to be a habit now, a bad habit, where they start off with a high growth projection and then have to revise it down. And this year is not going to be any different. We are probably going to get significantly less than 3%.
76 to 76 trillion rupees is the total debt of
Yeah,
Pakistan.
yeah,
And we have borrowed from various sources from Chinese government, Chinese banks, commercial loans, IMF, World Bank, and Middle Eastern countries, and I don't know how many others. But these are the main sources from which we have been borrowing. And we have this debt. Now, as you mentioned in the beginning, the IMF team is in Pakistan, and as it is reported, they are asking about Pakistan government's plan, that how they are going to return this money, how they are going to pay their installments in June 25, in December 25, and June 26. And as we hear, there is no solid plan. So here we are.
well, I am a bit surprised why IMF is doing that, because IMF, when it came into the EFF program, the Extended Fund Facility, it would have done a debt sustainability analysis. It would have then taken into account what the government at that time, the projections of how government is going to repay its debts and service its loans over a period of the facility. So I'm a bit shocked and surprised about these news. I don't think it's confirmed yet, and I'd be surprised because the debt sustainability analysis takes that into account, and that includes both rollovers. It also includes raising of some finances externally in the commercial market, as well as the facilities that other countries, friendly countries, have been financial assurances that friendly countries have been doing. So I think IMF, at least for the period of this extended fund facility, should have a pretty clear idea. Now it's questionable whether IMF's own projections have been that accurate. We have found over a number of years that IMF's projections when it comes to Pakistan very often are not that accurate, and they seem to miss targets repeatedly. For instance, until recently, they were expecting large private sector credit flows, as much as 8-10 billion. That didn't materialize, so they shaved it down. I think I'm not too sure about this story, what you're saying. I'd be surprised, but nevertheless, it is a concern. Pakistan's debt level overall close to 80 trillion. Of that, about 50 trillion, I mean, I speak in rounded up figures, is
Yes.
domestic debt, 30 trillion is external debt at a
Mm.
cost of say about 11% average or 10%, you're looking at, just in terms of interest rate servicing, you're looking at about 8 trillion. And this does not include principal repayments. If you see in terms of revenue collection, tax collection is about 12 trillion. So a significant chunk of your revenue collection just immediately goes into debt repayment, just servicing the debt.
Tax collection is a critical point here because we talk about increasing taxes, and we know that when we talk about increasing tax rate, it hurts the middle classes and the lower middle classes, working classes, more than anybody in this country. And then we also hear things about imposing agricultural tax. Now, agricultural tax, what happened to the wheat crop last year? There was a big scam. It's 2 years ago. And now we have, just last year, sorry. And now this year we hear that because the farmers were discouraged from growing wheat, now Pakistan has to import wheat worth $1 billion. So here we are. In this kind of situation, if we impose more taxes, so is the increasing tax rate or tax network more important, or increasing industrial base and addressing the core problem of energy in a balance? How do you see this situation?
Dr. Zafar, this is many sided question, and we are trying to answer a lot of them. But let's try and break it down.
Yes,
I think
please.
first let's look at taxes. First and foremost, there has to be equity in taxes. Every sector and everyone who earns should contribute to the tax net. Now, what happens in Pakistan, it seems the documented corporate sector and those who are working in corporate sector or the government whose salaries are documented, they by and large pay taxes. There's a large undocumented sector which does not pay taxes. Similarly, the retail hardly pays any taxes. In reality, agriculture hardly pays any taxes. Now, I think it is pretty unacceptable that certain segments of society should pay taxes and others should not. And because only certain segments of society pay taxes, as there's revenue shortage, because they are honest enough and because they are within the net, they are asked to pay more and more. And there are different ways then they are forced to pay. They also not only pay taxes in terms of direct taxes, but indirect taxes through the GST and various levies that exist. So I think before we say whether there should be more taxes, we should also address the fact that is there equity? That one of the sort of fundamental principles of taxation is that there should be equity. Every citizen and every corporate body which should be treated like should be paying taxes according to their affordability of paying taxes. And in Pakistan, unfortunately, that's not the case. There are large segments of society, whether it's retail, whether it's agriculture, whether those who are even professionals but don't declare their income fully, they don't pay taxes. As a result, a small segment is having to pay more and more taxes. In terms of, so I think we as a country, we are paying about 9.5%, 10%, probably 10.5% if we manage to achieve our targets this year of taxes. It's unacceptable. We'll continue to run into deficits, and these deficits effectively mean raising more borrowing, which means it's a burden on the future of our society. We need to increase taxes. We need to increase revenues, and to be able to pay back what we own. So that's my answer. I don't necessarily agree with this view that we are heavily taxed. Yes, certain groups of people are heavily taxed, but as a society as a whole, not all segments of society are contributing, and so everyone should fairly pay taxes.
Fair thing, absolutely. And the next thing is increasing, widening industrial base. So what I had in mind when I asked you this question, that when we look at the situation in the balance, if we are laying more emphasis on tax collection and not increasing the industrial base, So there has to be a balance between these two things: employment, revenue generation, or we remain imposing more taxes on who are already paying a lot of tax.
I think those who are already paying and paying fairly, they really should not pay more taxes. It's quite burdensome, and it makes it unfair in case of industries. Those who are honestly paying taxes, and if they are asked to pay more taxes, they become relatively uncompetitive. So it's actually the most efficient and the most effective. You're trying to get them out of the system. That's not what taxation should be doing. Having said that, I think there are two separate issues. Why we are not industrializing, part of it is maybe taxation issues, but part of it is that much of our industrial base is not competitive globally. We are a relatively small market. We're only about 300 billion. Most of the industries sectors are live or survive under the protective barriers of high tariffs, and not on a basis that they compete in the world. Now, in a modern world, I know Mr. Trump is trying to impose tariffs and he thinks it's beautiful. On the whole, the world has seen, and especially if you look at Far East countries, they have done well by having relatively low tariffs and having competitive markets where anyone can come and compete and actually produce goods and looks for efficiency in the society. So our industrial base will not grow unless we can compete internationally and produce goods so that they can be sold not only in our own domestic market, which is relatively small, it's about 300 billion, but a global economy which is 80 trillion. So we have to decide, we have to make a big decision whether we want to remain in this very small pond, or we want to really swim in the big ocean and actually take the advantages of what available. So I think industrial base, we can try and encourage it by lowering taxes and all this, but that won't do it. We'll have to reduce tariffs and tariffs significantly so
And
that we
also
have
reduce energy cost.
energy costs as well. And I think companies have to be more efficient. They can find solutions. There are very many solutions for energy nowadays. They have to be more efficient, or they have to actually go into industries which actually can afford higher energy costs. The fact of the matter is that energy cost is high. That's a reality. Either you pay for it, I pay for it, or the industry pays for it, and there's no reason why I should be paying
have
for it.
been unable to understand the energy policy of the government. We are paying 60%, what do you call,
Capacity charges.
capacity charges. Thank you so much. Capacity charges to these power producers.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the government started encouraging use of solar panels. Now, a growing number of households have solar energy. We are already paying to these power producers these capacity charges for the electricity that they are not producing, or if they are producing, we are not using. And now we hear that this net metering system has resulted in increasing the electricity bills of the people who do not have these solar panels, because there is more electricity in the grid and somebody has to pay for it. So
I think the net metering system is overblown. There's a relatively small percentage of people who have net metering, and they are obviously uh, benefiting from that. But that's a government policy. I think governments, the promises or the contract government makes with not only its own people but internationally, they have to abide by them. If you stop doing so, it leads to a great deal of confusion. Not only confusion, but also lack of credibility. So I think they should have thought about this before they got into it. Yes, I think it's a real issue. I think for all of that, Dr. Hassan Zafar Sahab, I would say this, that you need to have at some point not this piecemeal trying to approach, to change the tariffs of individual IPPs to stop them from production to get them to change their terms of contract. What we need is overall debt restructuring. And when we do this debt restructuring, in that we should also look at restructuring the terms of IPPs. We should look at restructuring the terms of domestic debt. We should look at restructuring the terms of international debt, as well as our pension scheme, which is going to become an incredible burden. We spend as much as 1 trillion rupees.
Remember we talked about it in our previous discussions.
Yeah,
This whole pension thing, it's maybe
yeah.
more than 1 trillion rupees.
Indeed.
Yes, almost like that. But what I'm gathering from your talk is that there is a close connection between growth rate, industrial base, our ability to produce more jobs, and this whole debt network. Because if we are not able to pay, then this debt will keep multiplying manifold, and there will be no end to it. And I don't know how long can we sustain all this.
You have put your fingers on it. I think we are already in a debt trap, even if we don't accept it. We are stuck in a low growth, relatively high interest rate environment, even though for a short period, inflation may be low. But if you look at the yield curves, they are suggesting that inflation will not necessarily be low for a long time. The yield curve suggests that interest rates will remain high at around anything above 11, 12%. So frankly speaking, we are really in a sort of standard stagflation environment. Now, given all of this, we need radical restructuring, reforms, which is not taking place. We need debt restructuring, we need tariff reduction, we need our fiscal
But talk about
situation.
restructuring and reforms. Is that a matter of policy, or is there a political reason behind not doing all this?
I
What
think
is
there's a
stopping
political.
we talk about restructuring, we talk about reform so much, but we don't see that happening. All
There's
we
always
see
there's talk and more talk, but there's
yes,
never action. Uh,
stopping. I'm trying to understand what is stopping this thing from happening.
I would say, look, for all of this, you must have the political capital to do tough things. Inevitably, there will be a period of pain, and this period of pain will mean that probably you'll have relatively low growth. But once you have set the agenda and you have set the ground, then you can have higher growth over an extended period. But as of now, because seems to be limited political capital, and we do not want to go, that's a completely different subject. There is an unwillingness to take the kind of tough reforms and tough adjustments that are needed. Whatever adjustments are done to cover them by those who have already been paying them. Even IMF seems to be complicit in this. They seem to be burdening the same group of people again and again. And these are the people who have least street power and an ability to influence politics. And that seems to be the fundamental
It
problem.
really, it really encourages me to mention your article in Arab News, Pakistan's dialectical confrontation threats to democracy and human rights. So there is certainly an undercurrent of politics in all of this discussion about economy. Do you think, without naming anyone, that the reins of Pakistan's economy are in wrong hands? That's why things are not happening. We know what needs to be done, but it's not happening. So what do we
and
understand?
it won't happen. I think, look, I think there are enough now serious people, institutional mechanisms have to be there, which require the people who have the reins of power to be responsive to the people, to be responsive to their needs. There have to be institutional arrangements which are inclusive, which take the people along. And so that is the fundamental process that any developed country which has done well has really included. Even you might say communist countries like China, which you might say are not perfect democracies, but they are very responsive to their people. They are always conducting surveys at a provincial and city level. They are very responsive to what the people are saying. Now, if you don't need to be as responsive, then you probably don't take the kind of necessary decisions which ensure long-term sustainable growth. And there's even a greater danger, Dr. Hassan Zafar Sahab, which I'm saying, if you don't include representation of the kind that is needed, then you can have young people, youth, then going underground. And without even mentioning things, we are seeing the effects of that
Don't
in
even
a
want
more
to
biased.
imagine that happening. Javed Hassan Saab, I really don't want to imagine that happening. And this also reminds me of George Orwell's Animal Farm. Something might happen some night. God forbid. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you
Thank you,
so
sir.
much for your time and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you very much for watching. Khuda
Thank you.
Hafiz, Pakistan Zindabad.